Hello everyone, I hope I found you in good health. I'm Arith Härger, an archaeologist, historian and artist, and before all of that, a pagan. And here I am today to answer a couple of questions. An interview by RavenzCraft Art. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's an honor. And obviously, thank you very much, Team Rothar. I'm supposed to begin this interview with a little introduction to my spiritual path as well. But as some of you already know, and as pretentious as this might sound, I do not follow any path but my own. So let's go straight to the questions. First question: how or when were you first drawn to your specific spirituality? Any traumatic or serious events that opened your eyes and helped you choose your path? Good start. Quite right. I grew up in the countryside in a Christian background, and that was traumatic enough, being a child introduced to the horrors of written in the Bible without any filter, going to bed every night with fear and waking up with fear. The prospect of being thrown into hell for no good reason other than being alive and breathing, which makes us all a walking sin, spend eternity in darkness and rivers of fire and blood, never to see those I love the most ever again. I think you can imagine how traumatic that is for a child, and I'm absolutely certain most people feel the same way when they grow up in a background such as this. The funny thing about this is that you are introduced into Christianity, into a religion of oppression and fear and constant doubt and anguish, in the attempts that in that fear you are submissive to that religion and follow it for the rest of your life, making sure you are afraid enough to not stray from the right path. But I could never see the Christian God as a benevolent entity, and I was never able to adapt. Living in fear was horrible, and it consumed my entire childhood. Christianity, or rather Catholicism, had the opposite effect on me. I hated everything that gave me the slightest hint of Christianity. I couldn't stand it because it wasn't right. All of my happiness being robbed by an unseen oppressive tyrant from the skies. Doesn't make sense. Much of my childhood was spent in fear because of that, exactly. And I even have a video about it. But when the person that had taught me all there was to know about Christianity eventually departed, there was a lot of doubt in me and a lot of internal conflicts. The person was someone I loved, but at the same time was the person whom it had ruined my childhood with such horrible tales. Not because the person hated me, I know she loved me, but she was worried about me, and as a Christian she was worried for my soul and wanted to save me. So a lot of mixed feelings in here. But when this person died, there was a certain freedom inside of me, because unfortunately I associated the person with that horrible religion, and in a certain way all that information, all those teachings were gone. So finally, at the age of 15, I've taken my first steps into paganism, seeking something that would be closer to my roots, something that made me feel closer to home, to a place inside my head I could feel comfort and protection, safety, because that's what children need when they are growing up, feeling safe and protected, not a constant battle with doubt and fear that robs us all of our most precious moments. Innocence is truly an illusion, unfortunately. So, at the age of 15, I rebelled against my own thoughts and everything I knew from the religious world. It was truly a rebellion in my head. To me, the Christian God existed because I grew up believing in that. But to me, he was a monster, a real monster. And inside my head, it was truly a rebellion against that entity, which I thought it was real. I thought to myself that it was better to try to be happy for a day, at least once for a change, than spend the rest of my life in fear and anguish and depression. I confess that I destroyed every Christian cross and thrown out of the window every Christian figure because I wanted to be free in here. I was about 10 or 11 when I did that. My first steps into paganism weren't easy. At the time I didn't even have a computer yet, and even if I had, Google was at a very young stage, and YouTube didn't even existed yet. No one was writing extensively about paganism, and back home there wasn't access to anything about paganism. So I felt really alone. In fact, I'm saying my first steps into paganism was at 15, but back then I didn't even know pagans existed. I was discovering other gods and other religions, but I didn't know in my lifetime pagans still existed. So it was a very solitary path, and still is, because I got used to that, and I continue to be a very solitary pagan and person in general. And now I can say that I've been a pagan longer than I've been a Christian, or rather forced to be a Christian. Do you believe that having specific spiritual following or doing magical or ritual work helps you to build up psychological strength and can get through certain problems and difficulties in life? Certainly, I do indeed. What I find nowadays in contemporary paganism, actually, in the great majority of cases, is that people either focus on practice and neglect theology, or vice versa. There is a clear separation between belief and practice, and I think that is still the vestiges of the previous religions people have been into. Christianity, for instance, starts off in ancient Rome as a religion that doesn't believe in witchcraft, in the sense of practicing magic as an expression of faith. It dealt with magic as simply superstition, and this idea lasted for centuries until, with Protestantism, witchcraft was taken more seriously, but as the result of interactions with the devil, always in the perspective of being something harmful and forbidden. So, among contemporary pagans, it's still rooted, this separation between belief and practice of magic, expressions of faith that revolve around folk magic. In many ancient pagan civilizations and cultures, belief and practice were entwined. So, certainly, practice is very important. Expression of faith through the practice of magic and ritual is important in a pagan perspective, obviously. When it comes to pagan gods, we cannot wait on them to do something for us simply because we have prayed to them or called on them, ask for things. Pagan deities have a much more animistic understanding, and you need to be in contact. You need to be out there, express physically and verbally, do the rituals, say the words, make the enchantments, express all your thoughts in movement and take action. That alone has a powerful side effect, so to speak, in your mind. For instance, in terms of psychology and in the panorama of depression, it is often put to practice dancing and singing because it enhances motor networks, auditory networks, organizational networks, memory, etc. in the brain, which augments social bonding and empathy. All the networks and emotions activated in the brain through the act of dancing and singing leads to the release of dopamine, which is the chemical responsible for making you feel good. It makes your brain work in a better way and brings all sorts of neuroprotective benefits for mental health. It's no coincidence. Dancing, drumming, and singing in shamanism leads to certain psychological levels that makes the person feel connected to its surroundings and makes the person feel good and have all sorts of spiritual experiences. So I think I have answered the question. What is your perspective on magical work? Do you think it is possible to change or alter things physically, psychologically, or make change in your life by using it? I kind of answered part of this question on the previous answer. Yes, definitely, there is a great change mentally. I would like to develop on this one of these days, and differences between ritual, ceremony, magic, and so on. Doesn't matter now. What we call witchcraft is an expression of faith, quite practical. You do have to get your hands into it and bend your thoughts, focusing on the purpose. What we call magic is the result of our actions, our practical and mental actions combined and expressed in the moment to reach the desired result. Magic is the interaction between ourselves and the supernatural, which through rituals there is a direct influence upon natural forces. Its power we harness through our actions, by bending our will and being in concordance with the supernatural forces we are making a certain interaction with. Magical work is very much about trying and failing hundreds of times until we finally succeed, until we finally get the result intended. I think magical work is quite useful in many ways, especially because we change indeed everything about us and our perspective of life changes. Because belief, faith, religion, spiritual path is just a perspective of life we have, and the more we interact with our beliefs, and the more we seek answers to our questions, the more knowledge we gain and our own perspectives evolve. There will come a time when we are even contradicting ourselves because we are rethinking, revising, because it's a constant process of evolution. And that's how things have to be, should be. Stagnation is terrible, especially for the mind. And magical work helps us to evolve, to find, to gather more knowledge. Do you practice any specific type of witchcraft or magical work? That is something that I keep to myself. That is very much part of my personal life, and I won't openly talk about it because there are many taboos and it's not a game. We do need to respect the laws and rules that we come about in such expressions. It is like painting on canvas. You express an idea and there is freedom in that expression, of course, but if you want the work to come out the way you intended, there are specific techniques you want to use, specific tools. Only sometimes in magical work you only gamble with your life. There are many obvious reasons why I don't openly speak about what I do in those terms. But in all honesty, one of the greatest reasons is because I hate when people meddle in things they should not be meddling in. My business is my own, and that's how I intend to keep it. Sorry about that. Can you tell us if you attend any yearly festivals or gatherings throughout the year? As I've said before, I'm a very solitary pagan, mainly because at the beginning I wasn't even aware there were other pagans. That doesn't mean, obviously, I wasn't in certain gatherings before, of course. Information being so hard to come by in the past century. A decade ago, Of course, I didn't receive knowledge out of nowhere spontaneously. My first public gathering with other pagans was actually 2 or 3 years ago. It was different. It was very funny. I felt awkward, obviously, and a little bit out of place, which I think is perfectly normal. But I had fun, and it was an interesting experience. But there are certain gatherings I attend to throughout the year, not public ones, of course, something more private, something more restricted. For instance, the wild hunt. A man has to make a living by collecting the souls of the damned. I'm only joking, obviously. There are certain gatherings, occasionally, not that often, in which my presence is required, along with others. It's not me. It's not just me. But I can speak about it. I'm sorry. But I can tell you something I have never forgotten, more or less. My first interaction with paganism was actually at the age of 3. I didn't know what it was, and only many years later that memory would pop out again. I can't say it was an event that changed me because, let's face it, I was only 3 years old and I had absolutely no idea what that was all about. But it's interesting because I was in the countryside. It was a moonless night. There was a summer party, a festivity going on in the middle of the village with music and fireworks and whatnot. I simply started to walk away from the village into the farm behind the house, into the fields. It was quite dark and I just walked in the direction of the forest. The memory is all blurry, but I eventually reached an opening in the forest, a grove, and there were people singing and dancing. It wasn't actually what we call singing, but more like grunts and moans, whatever. A great bonfire, or at least it looked big enough. I was only 3, so everything looked big. Many shadows of people dancing really fast around the fire, the bonfire, and a big man with stag horns on his head. The wolves howled nearby and the dogs were absolutely losing it back in the village. And that's just it. The memory ends here. I don't know how I came back home. I don't even know how I wasn't eaten by a wolf. It's a strange memory, but I do believe it was my first interaction or pagan gathering without even realizing it, obviously. And this interview is getting weird. So, I noticed you have recently been traveling a lot. In your research, have you found any similarities in other cultures' spiritual or magical workings? I only get 2 weeks of vacations each year, and I make sure I put those days to good use and try to visit other countries. I've never left Europe though, but I always find it interesting, the similarities in ancient religious beliefs all across Europe, mainly thanks to Indo-Europeans and their religious and social organism, which was adopted by many cultures. In the great majority of cases, it's the exact same things, only the names change, or, well, certain concepts here and there, obviously due to the influence of native European cultures before Indo-Europeans. But what I find most fascinating is the fact that we have been dealing with historical facts the past few centuries that are completely wrong. But we still teach that in schools, even universities. And one of the cases that fascinates me the most in these aspects are the Celts, the Celtic culture in general. We have been told far too many times, and it becomes indisputable truth, that the Celts originated in Central Europe. Everybody knows that. The Celts were not a people, but a culture that emerged in Central Europe and spread. As an archaeologist based in Portugal, most of my work is actually in Portugal, I find that quite intriguing because on the archaeological context, you find vestiges, even entire cities, of Celtic culture before the Celts supposedly emerged from Central Europe. What we call Celtic culture, jewelry, weapons, architecture, religious artifacts, all that encompasses the Celtic culture, already existed in Portugal before the Celts. So this just makes you wonder how biased our history truly is, European history. We continue to be taught the same history that was being taught in the 19th century. And a history reshaped and twisted to fit into the political notions of the 19th century. And now we have to rewrite history, revise it, completely tell a different tale from the one being told for at least the past 200 years, which will be quite hard. I find that a great challenge because obviously it will be hard for people to believe in something new, quite different from what has been told these past 200 years. But it's not that hard to believe if we take a look at the countries, for instance, that to this day retained Celtic dialects. In the UK, we have parts of Scotland, Ireland, we have Wales and Cornwall. We have Brittany in northwestern France, we have Galicia in northwestern Spain, and we have northern Portugal. You can clearly draw an imaginary line that crosses the entire western Atlantic coast. These are the countries that retained Celtic dialects to this day, because it has been their language longer than any other language from any other specific culture or group. This case of the Celts in the southwestern Atlantic being older than the ones in Central Europe is just a tiny fragment of the many historical facts that aren't in the books yet, because we have reached a point in which historical misinterpretations in the name of politics 200 years ago are still taken seriously as the universal truth. What about using mind-altering substances to reach higher levels spiritually, or to perceive things and receive information in a different way? Well, I cannot speak on behalf of those who have taken certain substances for the effects of mind-altering states of consciousness. I have never taken any substance myself, so I could only speak about it from the point of view of anthropology and not by experience. But I find it a bit worrisome that people prefer to focus on certain substances such as DMT and LSD, mushrooms, even ayahuasca, and so on, a variety of substances, when there are so many techniques to induce altered states of consciousness that don't require any drugs or any psychotropic substances. I'm not against that, mind you. Each person does it as they please. As long as they are adults, I assume they have enough responsibility to know what they are getting themselves into, or maybe not. Could be a responsible act or can be an escape from reality. But let's not enter in those fields. The fact is, people seem to take the easiest course. Might not be the safest, but it is certainly the easiest. Consuming something and wait for the effects. There are hundreds of ways to induce altered states of consciousness that do not require drugs. Most of them are not safe either, but it surely is harder. But if you consume certain substances, it is to believe you do not care about safety in the first place, but only care about the easier method. Spirituality isn't for lazy people. That is true. If people knew the true price of spirituality, there would be more atheists. I'm not against the use of drugs in this field, because, as I've said, people have to take responsibility for their actions. I just think that the effects brought by chemicals or even the fermentation of certain plants will only make people experience half of what they could experience in other ways. They won't fully experience things, and maybe that brings a certain disrespect to the work of real shamans. Because when something is easy, people tend to not give it a great value. And if they also experience something that isn't fully what they could experience in other ways, people won't learn much from those experiences, which unintentionally can create even more disrespect for the real thing. Has anything you have done in magical working ever really worked out? Have you had any strange or extraordinary happenings or outcomes from any types of spells, rituals, or magical work you have done? You assume I do it. Like I said before, magic workings is mostly about trying and failing until we succeed. So when we succeed, indeed it will always be, well, not unexpected presumably, but it's always a surprise. But that's the thing. If you don't believe it could happen, why are you trying it in the first place? Magic is an exercise of the mind. If you believe in it, it will work, and there won't be a great surprise in there after all. It's a paradox because it only works if you believe and bend your will to it. It will never work if you don't have faith in yourself. But it's always extraordinary to reflect on the power of our own minds and what we are capable of if we free our mind from what religions dictate to be real or not. How do you feel about baneful or harmful magical use? Curses, hexes, things of that nature created to harm or strike fear into others. Do you feel one should partake in these sort of workings? Have any advice or warnings for people doing it? This is quite a big one. We often label certain types of magic as black magic or white magic, which in my belief there are no such things. Only power we harness or capture through sorcery or rituals, and then we give it a purpose. Even in shamanism, we tend to label dark shamanism something that, in our perspective, isn't quite beneficial. And I think this is very much the mindset of the so-called Western societies, or rather the societies that have been for far too long in contact with religions that have a dualistic point of view. I do not believe in dualism, and it's not because of religion or magic or anything supernatural. We just have to step outside into society and be in contact with people. No one is naturally dualistic. Things are not as simple as to divide them into good and evil, beneficial or harmful. Each person is capable of great things. They can either be good or bad or neutral. But what we perceive to be good might be harmful to somebody else. And what we thought it was bad might have created some good. People's actions are not spontaneously, unless, of course, you have lost your mind. We give thought into it. There is a background. When someone acts in a way we would immediately recognize as being something in the category of evil, we don't know the amount of things and situations that led that person to do that. Maybe the person is even a victim of its own action. And such an action is just the accumulation of a variety of events from the past. We don't know what each person is going through, what inner battles they are fighting. We also never know if the good being practiced is actually good, or if the person is waiting for something in return. Because a good action, waiting for a reward, isn't good at all. It's just doing something to acquire something for its own benefit, and not because it really wants to do good. The good doesn't wash away the bad, and the bad doesn't wash away the good. We are all made of choices, and those choices will dictate the outcome of our lives. That is the truth. If magic is an exercise of the mind, it is our choice to make it whatever and whenever we want to make it. We know the consequences. We know what it will bring. We know the purpose. We do it because we want to. Something might seem good or evil, but the purpose of it can be the exact opposite. Because good and evil depends on the perspective of each person and, of course, the society they live in and the rules, laws, dogmas that have been imposed. In all honesty, each person in their right mind, of course, knows perfectly well what is good and what is bad. That is called empathy, putting ourselves in other people's shoes and knowing how to act. Last question. There were more questions, but I chose 10, I think. I'm not sure. We don't want to bore people, do we? Do you have any helpful or closing advice for all of us, fellow researchers and magical practitioners out there? Anything you have personally learned that you feel is important to know for people who are involved in this type of work and study? The real useful advice that I can give you is that do not seek a specific figure to be your guide. And I'm saying this on purpose because many people come to me seeking guidance, wanting me to be their spiritual guide. Many people are still looking for the Messiah. Many people cling on spiritual guides. I think in truth they are not seeking the spiritual. They are seeking someone that tells them how they should live, how they should conduct their lives. You are seeking a way to flee from responsibilities and have a figure of authority to tell you what should be done and how. You are seeking protection, safety. Don't do that. When someone tells you how you should conduct your life according to the society you live in, that's the worst thing you can get. Because we are all different and each one of us needs to have a completely different approach to life in order to seek what truly makes us feel happy. We cannot put human beings in the same categories and give them a piece of paper and saying, here's the list of instructions you need to follow and to behave accordingly to your gender, social status, personality, zodiac sign, animal totem, and the spirituality you have chosen. When you choose a figure to be your guide, you are following and living that person's dreams. You are restricted to that person's illusions, beliefs, and knowledge. It might be good for that person because that person knows himself or herself, and so the best advice they have is the advice that they know it works on them, but it might not be good for you, it might not work for you. That's what spirituality means, to seek our own path by ourselves. This doesn't mean that you should ignore others. Ask them for knowledge, ask them for their opinions, to share some insight, but do not strictly follow what they share with you. Don't take it as the only possible truth. Listen as much as you can, gather information as much as you can, and with all that knowledge you earn each day, you can create your own path. There's no need to follow. All you need to do is to listen and make sure you are never in a point that you feel stagnated. Never stop wanting to evolve, and don't be afraid when new information comes up and completely shatters what you believe in. That is good for you, because you are evolving and your beliefs are evolving as well. And there will be even more questions and you can continue to have and to move forward seeking new answers. That's the only advice I can give you. Know yourself first, know the gods inside you, and only then you can start to learn about the gods and the supernatural outside you. Right, the interview came to an end, finally. Thank you so much, RavenzCraft Art, and of course, Team Rotar, for this opportunity. It's an honor. And tack för idag.